Katie Morris had never been to space before. At 12 years old, she found herself walking through the corridors of the Galactic Youth Integration Academy, a massive station that floated somewhere between 3 different star systems. Her sneakers squeaked against the polished floor as she clutched her backpack straps, trying not to stare at the aliens passing by. There were tall ones with blue skin and extra arms, small ones that looked like walking crystals, and creatures she couldn't even begin to describe. Her mom had signed her up for this program 6 months ago. Earth was still new to the galactic community, and they wanted young humans to learn alongside alien kids. Katie had been excited at first, but now that she was actually here, her stomach felt like it was doing backflips. The classroom was bigger than her entire school back in Ohio. Rows of desks accommodated all shapes and sizes, from tiny stools to massive benches. Katie spotted a few other human kids scattered throughout the room and felt a little better. At least she wasn't the only one. Professor Renton stood at the front, a thin creature with gray skin and 4 eyes. He seemed nervous, constantly adjusting his collar and glancing at a datapad. When the chime rang for class to begin, he cleared his throat 3 times before speaking. Welcome to Advanced Sciences. Today we begin our partner assignments for the semester project. His voice crackled slightly through the universal translator everyone wore. You'll be working in pairs to study cross-species biology and adaptation. Katie relaxed a little. Partner work was fine. She was good at group projects back home. Professor Renton began reading names from his list. Students shuffled around, finding their partners, introducing themselves with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Katie waited, watching the other human kids get paired with aliens who seemed friendly enough. Then Professor Renton paused. His 4 eyes blinked in sequence, and Katie noticed his hand trembling slightly. Katie Morris, he said, his voice dropping lower. You'll be working with Ember. The classroom went completely silent. It was the kind of silence that made Katie's skin prickle. Every student turned to look at something behind her. She heard a scraping sound, like claws on metal, and then felt heat against her back. Katie turned around slowly. Sitting in the desk directly behind her was a dragon. An actual, real-life dragon. Well, a small one, about the size of a golden retriever, but definitely a dragon. Scales covered its body in overlapping patterns of red and orange that seemed to glow from within. 2 small horns curved back from its head, and its eyes were like molten gold. Smoke drifted lazily from its nostrils. The dragon cub stared at her. Katie stared back. She'd seen pictures of the draconids in her orientation materials, but the photos hadn't prepared her for meeting one in person. The creature radiated heat like a space heater turned up too high. Around them, every single student was moving their desk away. The scraping of furniture filled the room as a wide circle formed around Katie and the dragon cub. Even the other human kids were backing up, their faces showing concern. One of them, a tall boy named Derek, mouthed the words "be careful" at her. Professor Renton had his hand hovering over something on his desk. Katie noticed it was a big red button under a clear protective case. An emergency button. That didn't seem like a good sign. Everyone, please settle down, Professor Renton said, though his voice didn't sound very settled. Continue with your introductions. But nobody was introducing themselves anymore. Everyone was watching Katie and the dragon cub like they were expecting something terrible to happen at any moment. The dragon's scales started shifting darker, from bright orange to deep crimson. The heat intensified. Katie saw small wisps of flame flicker at the corners of the dragon's mouth. She didn't know much about draconids, but she understood body language. The dragon looked tense, defensive, like it was ready for a fight. Its claws dug into the desk, leaving small scratch marks in the metal. The whole situation felt like holding your breath, waiting for an explosion. Katie made a decision. She reached into her backpack and pulled out her lunch bag. Inside was the sandwich her mom had packed that morning, peanut butter and jelly on wheat bread, cut into 2 triangles the way she liked it. She took out one half and placed it carefully on the dragon's desk. Want some? She asked, keeping her voice normal and friendly, like she was talking to any new classmate. It's peanut butter and jelly. I always pack too much food anyway. The dragon cub's head tilted to one side. The aggressive red color in its scales flickered, shifting to confused purple. Smoke stopped curling from its nostrils. Those golden eyes fixed on the sandwich triangle like it was some kind of puzzle. Katie pushed it a little closer. Go ahead. You're probably hungry. First days are always long. Very slowly, the dragon reached out with one clawed hand. The claws were sharp enough to cut through metal, but they handled the sandwich with surprising gentleness, picking it up delicately. The dragon sniffed it once, then took a careful bite. Its eyes widened. The scales shifted again, this time to softer oranges with hints of yellow. The heat in the air decreased noticeably. Around them, Katie heard students let out breath they'd been holding. Professor Renton's hand moved away from the emergency button, though he still looked ready to spring into action at any moment. "I'm Katie," she said, turning her desk slightly so they could face each other better. "I'm from Earth. Ohio, specifically. It's pretty flat and boring compared to a space station, but we've got good ice cream shops." The dragon finished the sandwich half and looked at her with what might have been gratitude. When it spoke, its voice was surprisingly soft, almost shy. "I'm Ember. From the Draconid home colonies." "Cool name," Katie said genuinely. "So, I guess we're partners for this project. Have you done biology studies before?" Ember shook his head slowly, scales now settling into calm blues and soft greens that Katie hadn't even known dragons could produce. "This is my first time in a mixed species school. Most draconids aren't allowed until we're much older." Katie sensed there was a story behind that, but it didn't seem polite to ask on the first day. Instead, she pulled out her notebook and a pen. "Well, first times are always weird. But we'll figure it out together, okay?" For the first time, Ember's mouth curved into what might have been a smile, though it showed a lot of very sharp teeth. "Okay." Behind them, Professor Renton sat down heavily in his chair, looking like he'd just witnessed something impossible. Around the classroom, students slowly turned back to their own partners, though many kept glancing over at the human girl and the dragon cub who were now chatting about the project assignment like it was the most natural thing in the world. Katie didn't know it yet, but that shared sandwich had just changed the course of galactic history. 3 weeks had passed since that first day, and Katie and Ember had become inseparable. They ate lunch together in the cafeteria, studied in the library after classes, and walked the station corridors side by side. Other students had stopped backing away when they approached, though Katie noticed they still kept a respectful distance. The faculty members, however, never quite relaxed. She could see it in their faces, the way they watched Ember like he was a bomb that might go off at any second. Katie didn't see it that way. Sure, Ember was a dragon who could breathe fire and had claws sharp enough to tear through steel, but he was also her friend. He had a terrible sense of humor, loved strawberry-flavored drinks even though they weren't part of his normal diet, and got frustrated easily when schoolwork didn't make sense right away. He was just a kid, like her. Mathematics class on Thursday afternoon changed everything. Professor Renton was teaching quantum calculations, the kind of advanced stuff that made Katie's head hurt. The formulas stretched across 3 holographic screens, full of symbols and numbers that seemed to rearrange themselves when you weren't looking directly at them. Ember was struggling. Katie could tell by the way his tail twitched and curled, how his claws kept tapping against the desk in an irregular rhythm. They'd been working on a practice problem for 15 minutes, and nothing was clicking. The answer kept coming out wrong, and the frustration was building in him like pressure in a sealed container. She watched as his scales began to change color. The calm blues that had become his normal shade started shifting to orange, then to deeper red. Heat began radiating from his body in waves. The student sitting 2 desks over quietly moved his chair farther away. "It doesn't make sense," Ember muttered, his voice tight. "I've done this calculation 4 times and it's wrong every time. The numbers won't work." "Hey, it's okay," Katie started to say, but Ember wasn't listening anymore. His breathing had quickened, coming out in short bursts. Smoke began curling from his nostrils in thick gray streams. The scales along his spine stood up like raised hackles on an angry dog. The temperature around their desk spiked noticeably. Katie felt sweat break out on her forehead. Other students were pushing their desks back now, creating that familiar circle of empty space. She heard someone whisper "he's going to blow" in a panicked voice. Professor Renton's hand shot toward the emergency alarm. His 4 eyes were wide with fear. In the corner of the room, Katie saw the automated fire suppression systems beginning to activate, nozzles descending from the ceiling. Ember's claws punctured straight through the desk surface. Small flames licked at the corners of his mouth. His whole body trembled with the effort of holding something back. Katie knew from their late-night conversations that young draconids had almost no control when their tempers flared. The fire came whether they wanted it to or not, and once it started, it fed on itself until everything burned. But Katie remembered something her mom had taught her years ago, back when her little brother Tyler was having meltdowns in grocery stores and parking lots. Big feelings weren't the enemy. They just needed somewhere to go. She moved her hand slowly, telegraphing the movement so Ember could see it coming, and placed it gently on his shoulder. His scales were hot enough to be uncomfortable, but not quite hot enough to burn. "Not yet. Ember," she said quietly, just loud enough for him to hear. Look at me. Just look at me for a second. His golden eyes snapped to her face. They were almost completely white now, glowing with barely contained fire. But he was looking at her. That was a start. We're going to breathe together, okay? Like we practiced last week when you were upset about that history test. Remember? Katie took an exaggerated breath in through her nose. In for 4 counts. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ember's chest heaved, but he was trying to match her rhythm. The flames at the corners of his mouth flickered uncertainly. Good. Now hold it. 2, 3, 4. Katie held her own breath, maintaining eye contact. Around them, the classroom had gone completely silent. Even Professor Renton had frozen, his hand still hovering over the alarm button. Now let it out slowly. 2, 3, 4. Katie exhaled steadily, and Ember did the same. A gust of hot air and smoke, but no flames. Again, Katie said. In for 4. You're doing great. 1, 2, 3, 4. They breathed together. In and out, counting steadily. Katie kept her voice calm and even, the same way her mom had sounded during Tyler's worst moments. She kept her hand on Ember's shoulder, a steady pressure that said, I'm here, you're not alone, we'll get through this. Gradually, the heat began to decrease. The white glow faded from Ember's eyes, revealing the golden color underneath. His scales shifted from angry red to orange, then to yellow, and finally back to the peaceful blue they'd been before. The smoke stopped flowing from his nostrils. His claws retracted from where they'd punched through the desk. Ember slumped forward, exhausted. Katie rubbed his shoulder gently. There you go. You did it. You stayed in control. I almost didn't, Ember whispered, his voice shaky. I felt it building. The fire wanted out so badly. But you stopped it. That's what matters. Katie pulled her water bottle from her bag and offered it to him. Here. Drink some of this. It'll help you cool down. Ember took the bottle with trembling claws and drank deeply. Around them, students were staring with open mouths. The automated fire systems retreated back into the ceiling. Professor Renton slowly lowered his hand from the alarm button and sat down hard in his chair, looking like someone had just pulled his bones out. How? Another student started to ask, but couldn't finish the question. Katie shrugged. My little brother gets really overwhelmed sometimes. His feelings get too big and he doesn't know what to do with them. My mom taught all of us breathing exercises and ways to calm down. They work pretty well. She turned back to Ember. Want to look at that math problem again? I think I figured out where we went wrong. We were using the wrong formula for the third step. Ember nodded slowly, still catching his breath. Yeah. Okay. They bent over the problem together, Katie explaining where the calculation had gone off track. Professor Renton watched them from his desk, his hand shaking slightly as he picked up his communicator. He typed out a message to the Draconid Council representatives, knowing this footage from the classroom cameras would change everything they thought they knew about their own species. A human child had just done what Draconid elders spent decades trying to achieve. She talked a young dragon down from a fire rage using nothing but patience, breathing exercises, and a steady hand on his shoulder. She treated him like a friend who needed help, not a monster who needed to be contained. And that, Professor Renton realized as he watched Katie and Ember successfully solve the math problem together, made all the difference in the world. The field trip to the agricultural dome had everyone excited. It was a massive space at the bottom of the station, 5 levels tall and stretching nearly half a mile across. Inside, plants from 100 different worlds grew in carefully controlled environments. Earth vegetables sat beside alien fruits that glowed in the dark. Trees with silver leaves grew next to bushes that hummed softly when you walked past them. Katie and Ember wandered through the hydroponic section, looking at tomatoes from Earth growing in floating nutrient solutions. Next to them were centurion crystal fruits that looked like purple diamonds hanging from vines. The whole dome smelled like soil and growing things, which made Katie a little homesick for her grandmother's garden back in Ohio. These taste like apples mixed with mint, Ember said, reading the information placard next to the crystal fruits. That sounds weird. Your people eat raw metals as snacks, Katie pointed out with a grin. You don't get to call other food weird. Ember's scales flushed with embarrassed yellow, but he was smiling. They'd gotten comfortable with each other over the past few weeks, trading jokes and teasing like old friends. Katie had learned that Draconids had a great sense of humor once you got past their scary reputation. Ember had learned that humans laughed at just about anything, especially their own mistakes. Around them, about 200 students explored the dome in small groups. Teachers and chaperones were scattered throughout, making sure nobody touched anything they weren't supposed to. A group of younger kids, probably 8 or 9 years old, clustered near the Earth section, excitedly pointing at strawberry plants. The explosion came without any warning at all. 1 second everything was peaceful, and the next there was a deafening bang from somewhere above. The entire dome shook. Katie grabbed onto a nearby railing as the floor trembled beneath her feet. Alarm sirens started wailing, and emergency lights began flashing red. Coolant pipe burst on level 3, someone shouted over the intercom. "Evacuate Sector 7 immediately." Katie looked up and saw it happening in horrible slow motion. A massive support beam, easily 40 feet long and made of reinforced steel, had been knocked loose by the explosion. It was falling, tumbling end over end as it plummeted toward the ground floor. And directly beneath it, frozen in terror, was that group of young kids who'd been looking at the strawberry plants. The teachers were too far away. The children were too scared to move. The beam was falling too fast. Katie heard someone screaming, and distantly realized it might be her. Then Ember moved. His body launched forward faster than Katie had ever seen him go, his legs powerful despite his size. He didn't run toward the kids. Instead, he positioned himself between them and the falling beam, planted his feet wide, and looked up. His mouth opened, jaws spreading wider than should have been possible for his size. What came out wasn't the small flames Katie had seen him practice with in controlled sessions. This was something primal, something ancient that came from deep in his chest. A column of white-hot fire erupted upward like a rocket engine, so bright that Katie had to shield her eyes. The heat was intense even from 20 feet away, like standing too close to a bonfire. The falling beam hit that column of fire and simply ceased to exist as a solid object. Metal melted instantly, turning to liquid that splattered harmlessly to the sides, cooling as it hit the ground in silvery puddles. The beam that would have crushed those children was gone, vaporized by dragon fire that burned hotter than anything humans could create in a laboratory. But Katie knew what came next. She'd heard Ember describe it during their late-night conversations. The fire rage. Once a draconid started burning like this, they couldn't stop. The flames fed themselves, growing stronger, and the dragon lost all control. They burned until exhaustion took them, destroying everything within reach. It was why young draconids were never allowed near others. It was why Ember's people were feared across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. Ember's entire body was glowing now, scales so bright they were almost white. His eyes had lost all color, just pure light shining from his skull. The fire kept coming, shooting upward in a continuous stream. The air around him shimmered with heat. Students were running, teachers were shouting, and emergency systems were activating throughout the dome. Katie didn't run. She walked straight toward him, even though the heat made her skin feel like it was sunburning with every step. Other students shouted at her to get back, that she was going to die, but she ignored them. She knew Ember. He wasn't a monster. He was her friend, and he was scared. She got close enough that the heat was almost unbearable, close enough that she could smell her hair starting to singe. Then she reached out and put her hand firmly on Ember's shoulder, right where his scales met the ridge of his spine. "Ember," she said, loud enough to be heard over the roar of flames. "Look at me. You did it. Everyone's safe now." The fire continued, but she felt him trembling under her hand. He was fighting it, fighting against thousands of years of instinct and biology that told him to keep burning. "Those kids are okay because of you," Katie continued, keeping her voice steady even though she was terrified. "You saved them. You're a hero. But now you need to stop, okay? We need you to come back." Ember's head turned slightly toward her voice. The fire flickered. "Breathe with me," Katie said, falling back on what had worked before. "I know it's hard. I know the fire wants to keep going. But you're stronger than it is. You've always been stronger than it. In for 4 counts. Come on. 1, 2, 3, 4. She took an exaggerated breath, even though the superheated air hurt her lungs. Ember's chest shuddered, caught between the need to breathe fire and the need to breathe normally. "You can do this," Katie said firmly. "I believe in you. Hold it. 2, 3, 4. The column of fire sputtered. Students watching from behind emergency barriers held their breath. Professor Renton had his communicator out, recording everything, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the device. "Now let it out. Slowly. 2, 3, 4. Katie exhaled, her hand never leaving Ember's shoulder. The fire died. Not gradually, but all at once, like someone had flipped a switch. Ember collapsed immediately, his legs giving out. Katie went down with him, wrapping her arms around his neck as he crumpled to the ground. His scales were still hot enough to be uncomfortable, but she didn't let go. "You did it," she whispered. "You stopped it. I'm so proud of you." Ember was shaking, his whole body trembling with exhaustion and residual adrenaline. His scales had gone completely gray, the color of ash. "I felt it," he said weakly. "The rage. It wanted me to burn everything. It was so strong, Katie." "But you were stronger," she said, holding him tighter. "You beat it." Around them, teachers were rushing to check on the younger children, who were crying but unhurt. Other students stared at Katie and Ember with expressions ranging from awe to disbelief. Security teams were arriving to assess the damage, but they stopped short when they saw the human girl hugging the dragon cub. Professor Renton approached slowly, his communicator still recording. "Katie, Ember, are you both all right?" Katie nodded, still not letting go of Ember. "We're okay. Is everyone else safe?" "Thanks to Ember, yes. No one was hurt." Professor Renton looked at Ember with something like wonder in his 4 eyes. "What you just did, controlling the fire rage, no draconid your age has ever accomplished that. Most adults can't do it." Ember lifted his head weakly. "Katie helped me." "I just reminded you of what you already knew," Katie said. "You're the one who stopped it." Professor Renton's communicator chimed. He glanced at it and his expression changed. "The Draconid Council has been watching the live feed from the dome cameras. They're coming here. They want to meet both of you." Katie felt Ember tense in her arms. "Is he in trouble?" "No," Professor Renton said quickly. "Quite the opposite. I think they want to understand how you did this. Because if one human child can teach a Draconid cub to control the fire rage, everything my people thought we knew about dragon biology and psychology might be wrong." The grand auditorium was the largest space on the station, built to host gatherings of thousands. Right now, it felt too big and too empty. Katie stood in the center of the polished floor, acutely aware of how small she looked. Her sneakers squeaked against the surface as she shifted nervously. Ember sat beside her, his scales a muted gray that hadn't changed since the incident 3 days ago. Above them, 5 massive holographic projections materialized. Each one showed an adult draconid, and they were enormous. Katie had thought Ember was impressive, but these dragons were the size of buildings. Their scales glittered like armor, deep reds and blacks and purples that spoke of age and power. When they moved, even just to adjust their positions, Katie could hear the sound transmitted through the projection, like boulders grinding together. Professor Renton and Director Wells stood off to the side, ready to intervene if needed, though Katie wasn't sure what they could actually do if things went wrong. The director had explained that the council rarely left their homeworld, and having 5 elders appear even through hologram was unprecedented. The central dragon, whose scales were so dark they were almost black, spoke first. His voice was deep and resonant, filling the entire auditorium. "I am Elder Thornscale, first speaker of the Draconid Council. We have watched the recordings from your agricultural dome incident. Multiple times." His massive eyes focused on Katie. "You are the human child called Katie Morris." Katie's mouth was dry, but she managed to speak. "Yes, sir. You placed yourself in direct contact with a Draconid cub experiencing fire rage. You understand this should have resulted in your death." "It wasn't a question. I didn't think about that part," Katie admitted honestly. "I just knew Ember needed help." Another elder, this one with deep purple scales, leaned forward. "Help. An interesting word choice. Explain your methods, human child. How did you teach emotional control to a Draconid when our own people require decades of meditation and isolation to achieve even basic management?" Katie glanced at Ember, who gave her a tiny nod of encouragement. She took a breath and tried to organize her thoughts. "I didn't really teach him anything complicated. When Ember gets upset, I help him calm down using the same stuff my mom taught me for my little brother." "Your sibling requires similar intervention?" a third elder asked. "Tyler has ADHD. His brain works differently, and sometimes he gets really overwhelmed by feelings. They get too big and he doesn't know what to do with them." Katie could see the elders exchanging glances, but she pressed on. "My mom taught our whole family ways to help. Breathing exercises are the main one. When you're really upset, your breathing gets fast and shallow, which makes your body think you're in danger, which makes you more upset. It's like a circle that feeds itself. The fire rage operates on a similar principle," Elder Thornscale said slowly. "The flames trigger more aggression, which creates more flames. Right, so you have to break the circle, Katie explained. The breathing helps your body calm down, which makes your brain realize you're actually safe, which makes the feelings smaller and more manageable. We also break big problems into smaller pieces. When Ember was struggling with that math problem, it felt too huge and impossible. But when we looked at it one step at a time, it became something he could handle. A fourth elder, whose scales shimmered between red and gold, spoke up. These techniques are common among your people. Pretty much every kid learns them. In elementary school, we have counselors who teach emotional regulation skills. You know, recognizing your feelings, understanding what triggers them, finding healthy ways to cope. Katie shrugged. It's just normal stuff. I thought everyone did it. The silence that followed was heavy. The five elders looked at each other, and Katie got the sense of an entire conversation happening that she couldn't hear. Finally, Elder Thornscale spoke again, and his voice was softer than before. No, Katie Morris. Everyone does not do this. Draconid culture has, for 10,000 years, dealt with emotional volatility through separation and suppression. We remove our young from all social contact at age 5. They live in isolation, studying meditation techniques, learning to wall off their emotions through sheer force of will. Most don't rejoin society until they are 40 or 50 years old. Many never achieve adequate control and must remain isolated for life. Katie felt her stomach twist. She looked at Ember, seeing him in a new light. That's why you were so surprised when I shared my sandwich. You'd never had anyone just be nice to you before. Ember's scales flickered with sad blues. I was scheduled for isolation in 3 months. This academy was supposed to be my last chance to be around others before 50 years alone. That's horrible, Katie said, and she didn't care that she was contradicting ancient dragon elders. You're just a kid. Kids need friends and families and people who care about them. Locking them away alone would make anyone struggle with their emotions. You believe our traditional methods are counterproductive, the purple-scaled elder said. I think if you tell someone they're dangerous and uncontrollable, and then leave them alone with nothing but their own thoughts for decades, yeah, that's probably going to make things worse, not better. Katie could feel her own emotions rising now, frustration at the thought of Ember spending the next 50 years alone in some cell. Feelings aren't the enemy. They're just information. Being angry or scared or frustrated is normal. It's what you do with those feelings that matters. And you believe connection, rather than isolation, is the solution, Elder Thornscale said. I mean, it worked for Ember, didn't it? Katie gestured to her friend. He stopped the fire rage. He saved those kids and then managed to control something that supposedly can't be controlled. And he did it because someone was there with him, helping him through it. The fifth elder, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Her scales were a deep crimson, and her voice carried a weight of immense age. Tell me, Katie Morris. Your brother with ADHD. Does he still struggle with overwhelming emotions? Sometimes, yeah. But he's getting better at managing them because he has support. Our whole family knows his triggers and how to help. His teachers know. He's not alone with it. Katie paused. That's the important part, I think. Not being alone. Elder Thornscale shifted his massive bulk, and even through the hologram Katie could feel the weight of his presence. We have been approaching our species' greatest weakness with entirely the wrong methodology. For 10,000 years, we have chosen isolation and suppression. We sought to control fire through force of will alone. But perhaps the answer was always simpler. Connection. Guidance. Patience. Support. He looked directly at Ember. Young one, do you wish to continue learning with this human? Ember's scales brightened for the first time since the incident, shifting to hopeful yellows. Yes, Elder. More than anything. Then you shall. Elder Thornscale's gaze swept across all 5 council members. We have made our decision. The Draconid Council hereby initiates the companion program. Every Draconid cub, rather than facing isolation, will be paired with a human mentor who will teach them emotional regulation through connection rather than suppression. Katie's eyes widened. Every cub? There must be thousands of them. Tens of thousands, the Purple Elder confirmed. We will need human volunteers. Many of them. Adults who have raised children of their own. Teachers. Counselors. Simple people with patient hearts and the knowledge your species treats as common sense. We're going to change our entire culture, Elder Thornscale said. Because a 12-year-old human showed us that the path we've walked for millennia was the wrong one. Katie Morris, you have done something remarkable, though I suspect you don't fully understand it yet. You saw someone who needed help, and you helped them. In doing so, you may have saved our entire species from ourselves. Katie looked down at Ember, whose scales were now cycling through every color of happiness and relief. She put her hand on his shoulder, right where it always went. I just didn't want my friend to be alone, she said quietly. Nobody should have to face hard things alone. 6 months had changed everything. Katie stood at the main docking bay of the Galactic Youth Integration Academy, watching transport ships arrive in steady streams. Each one carried precious cargo, young draconids, nervous and uncertain, coming to meet the humans who would guide them through the most difficult years of their lives. Ember stood beside her, and the difference was remarkable. He'd grown to the size of a small horse, his body filling out with muscle and strength. But more importantly, his scales held steady in calm blues and greens, the colors of contentment and peace. He wore a special vest now, marked with symbols that identified him as a companion program ambassador. Other young draconids would look to him as proof that this new way could work. I'm nervous, Ember admitted, his tail swishing behind him. What if the others don't adjust as well as I did? What if their humans can't help them the way you helped me? Katie squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. They will. You're not special because you're different from other draconids. You're special because someone finally gave you the tools you needed. Every one of these cubs has that same potential. Professor Renton approached them, carrying a datapad that seemed to constantly buzz with notifications. He looked exhausted but happy, his 4 eyes bright with excitement. The first wave is 300 cubs. We have families waiting from Earth, Mars Colony, Europa Station, and 15 other human settlements. The response to our volunteer request was overwhelming. How many people signed up? Katie asked. Over 50,000 in the first week alone. Professor Renton shook his head in wonder. Parents, grandparents, retired teachers, social workers, counselors. When we explained what was needed, humans just showed up. Many said they'd raised challenging children of their own and understood what these cubs were going through. Katie smiled. That sounded right. Humans had this way of hearing that someone needed help and immediately asking what they could do. It was one of her favorite things about her species. The first transport ship docked with a metallic clang that echoed through the bay. The airlock cycled, and a group of young draconids emerged, moving slowly and staying close together. Their scales showed every color of anxiety, reds, oranges, flashing purples. Some had their tails wrapped around themselves defensively. Others kept their heads down, avoiding eye contact. Waiting for them was a diverse group of humans. Katie saw an older woman with gray hair and kind eyes, a younger couple holding hands nervously, a single dad with calloused hands that spoke of hard work, and a former teacher who'd retired from Earth schools just to join this program. They'd all completed the rush training course that Katie and Ember had helped design, learning the basics of draconid body language, common triggers, and intervention techniques. One small draconid cub, barely bigger than a large cat, stood frozen at the edge of the group. His scales were cycling through colors so fast it made Katie dizzy to watch, red to purple to orange to gray and back again. He was terrified. The older woman with gray hair stepped forward slowly, her movements careful and non-threatening. She knelt down to be at the cub's eye level. Hello there. My name is Helen. I'm from a place called Wisconsin, back on Earth. I raised 3 kids of my own, and they were all handful in their own ways. She smiled warmly. I'm here to help you, if you'll let me. No pressure, no rush. We can just sit here for a while if that's what you need. The cub stared at her, clearly not knowing what to make of this approach. In draconid culture, adults were authorities who demanded obedience and control. But this human woman was offering something else entirely, patience and understanding. I brought some snacks, Helen continued, pulling a small container from her bag. I wasn't sure what you'd like, so I brought a few different things. We can share them and get to know each other. Does that sound okay? Very slowly, the cub's scales began to settle into less frantic patterns. He took a tentative step forward. Helen's smile widened, but she didn't rush him. She just waited, letting him move at his own pace. Katie felt a lump in her throat. This was it. This was the moment when everything changed for these cubs. They were getting what Ember had gotten, a chance to be seen as individuals who needed support rather than monsters who needed to be contained. More ships were arriving now, and the docking bay filled with the controlled chaos of families meeting their new companions. Katie watched a maintenance worker from Mars Colony kneel beside a medium-sized cub, showing him pictures of his workshop and explaining how the cub could help with repairs if he wanted to learn. She saw a couple introducing their own children, a boy and girl who immediately started asking the Draconid cub questions about his favorite colors and whether he'd ever played zero-gravity tag. Professor Renton's datapad buzzed insistently. He glanced at it and his expression shifted to surprise. "Katie, you need to see this. The Stellar Collective just sent a formal diplomatic request." "What kind of request?" "They want human mediators for their border dispute with the Outer Rim territories. The conflict has been deadlocked for 6 years, and they think humans might be able to find a solution." Professor Renton scrolled through more messages. "And the Centaurian Medical Consortium wants to study human therapeutic techniques for trauma treatment. And the Makers, who never ask anyone for anything, have requested human advisors for their colony integration programs." Ember's eyes widened. "Everyone's watching what happened with us." "Of course they are," Professor Renton said. "The Draconids were the most aggressive, most feared species in this sector of space. If humans can help them transform their entire culture within a single generation, then what else might humans be able to solve? What other impossible problems might just need a different approach?" Katie watched Helen and the small Draconid cub walking away together, the woman's hand resting gently on the cub's back as she talked to him in soothing tones. The cub's scales had settled into tentative blues, and he was actually responding to her questions, his voice soft but growing stronger. "It's not really that complicated," Katie said quietly. "We just treat people, any people from any species, like they matter. Like their struggles are real and valid. Like they deserve support instead of judgment. That simple approach is revolutionary to species who've forgotten how to be kind," Professor Renton replied. "Or who never learned in the first place." More families were arriving now, and more cubs. The program would bring in 10,000 young Draconids over the next year. After that, if things went well, every Draconid cub in the Empire would enter the companion program instead of isolation. Within a generation, the entire species would be different. Softer. More connected. Capable of cooperation and friendship with others. A young Draconid approached Katie and Ember cautiously. His scales were uncertain yellows and greens. "You're Ember? The one from the videos?" Ember straightened up, his own scales brightening with pride. "I am. And this is Katie, my companion. Is it true? That she helped you stop a fire rage?" The young cub's voice was filled with hope and disbelief mixed together. "It's true," Ember confirmed. "And I'm not special. You can learn the same things I did. All of us can. We just need someone to teach us, someone who believes we're worth the effort." The young cub looked at Katie with something like awe. "Will there be someone for me? Someone like you?" Katie smiled and gestured to the crowd of waiting humans. "There's someone for everyone. That's the whole point. No more isolation. No more facing hard things alone. You're going to have help, and support, and someone who'll stick with you even when things get difficult." The cub's scales shifted to brighter, happier colors. He bounded off toward the group of waiting families, his earlier fear forgotten. Ember leaned his head against Katie's shoulder, something he'd started doing when he was feeling emotional. "Thank you. For everything. For sharing your sandwich that first day. For not being scared of me. For teaching me I didn't have to be alone." "Thank you for being my friend," Katie replied. "And for showing everyone that change is possible." They stood together, watching as more ships arrived and more families formed. The docking bay was full of nervous energy and tentative hope, awkward introductions and gentle encouragement. It was messy and imperfect and absolutely beautiful. Professor Renton received another notification and laughed. "The galactic news networks are calling this the human solution. They're saying that Earth's greatest export isn't technology or resources. It's compassion." Katie thought about that. Compassion. The ability to see someone suffering and want to help. The willingness to share what you had, even if it was just half a sandwich. The patience to sit with someone through their worst moments. The belief that everyone, regardless of species or history, deserved support and understanding. Maybe that was humanity's real gift to the galaxy. Not weapons or ships or scientific discoveries, though they had those too. But the simple, radical idea that kindness mattered. That connection was stronger than isolation. That the best way to help someone control their fire wasn't to lock them away alone, but to stand beside them and say, "I'm here. We'll figure this out together." Ember's scales glowed with contentment as another ship docked. More cubs. More families. More chances for transformation. Katie smiled. This was just the beginning. If humans could help Draconids overcome 10,000 years of destructive tradition, what else could they do? The galaxy was full of species who'd forgotten how to be kind, or who'd never learned. And humans, it turned out, were excellent teachers. All it took was being willing to share your sandwich with someone who looked lonely.